It's a Tuesday and time for another Fenway Rundown episode, the first of two this week. We'll be having another later in the week. I'm Sean McAdam. Chris Cotillo, my usual co-host, is off for the week, but he is being more than ably replaced. We'll get to that in 1 minute. But before we get into your mailbag questions for today's podcast, a reminder that the best way to be eligible to ask questions like this in the future is to be part of the Fenway Rundown Insider Text Program, which you can do by texting the word join to 617 751 6257. Then click on the link to subscribe. That will give you a free 14-day trial period, and that will enable you to get all the breaking news, keep up with everything, get the lineups during the season, be able to ask us questions of anyone on the baseball staff here at MassLive.com, and as we said, submit questions for future mailbag editions. $4.99 per month after the free 14-day trial period. Without further ado, it is time to get into one of those mailbag editions. It certainly has been a very busy couple of weeks for the Red Sox with a big trade last week for Garrett Crochet. Prior to that, the signing uh, of a couple of free agents, Aroldis Chapman included. And this is an opportunity for you to ask questions about where things are headed. And today I'm happy to be joined by Lauren Campbell, producer extraordinaire, content provider. She does everything for us, and we're happy to have her. Happy holidays, Lauren, and thanks for joining us.
Happy holidays to you, and thank you for inviting me back.
Always great to have you. And with that, why don't we get to some questions?
Yeah, so the first one is Sean wants to know where Sidon Rafaela fits into Boston's plans and if he has any trade value and why they paid him so much last year.
Um, Yeah, it's a good question as to where Rafaela ends up because he moved around last year, started about half the games in the infield, half the games in the outfield. Many thought he should have been the utility Gold Glove winner for his play at both positions. He certainly demonstrated that he is an um, excellent outfielder, defender. One of the issues has been not getting on base enough, and really showing some discipline at the plate in terms of the strike zone. The Red Sox hope that gets better. Does he have trade value? Absolutely, even with the big contract signed and maybe some struggles offensively. But I don't think the Red Sox are looking to move him. I suppose that in a perfect deal that he had to be included in, depending on what they were getting back, they would entertain it. I don't think there are many uh, untouchables on that roster, but they made that commitment of about $50 million for him because they think he's going to be a very useful guy going forward. You could see him if Abreu gets traded to bring back some pitching. I could see Rafaela starting out in right field. He certainly has the arm and range to handle that. He could also be a super utility guy who could help out in the infield and in the outfield. I think a lot of what Rafaela does next year is going to be dependent on what the Red Sox do here in the next couple of weeks.
And kind of sticking with where players fit, Frank is curious where the Red Sox view Vaughn Grissom for 2025 and if they kind of see him as still that potential starting second baseman or maybe a backup shortstop.
Yeah, an excellent question. And I think, again, I'm afraid I'm going to take a lot of these similar questions and provide nearly identical answers. A lot is going to be dependent on what else they do this offseason. For instance, if they sign Alex Bregman to play second base, then that's a major commitment, and Grissom becomes either a backup or trade piece that could be sent out, or he could return to AAA and continue to develop. But if they don't get somebody like Bregman or another second baseman, then I think he goes into camp with a decent chance of winning that second base job. That's how they envisioned him last year. It obviously didn't work out. He got off to a bad start, missing most of spring training because of some injuries, but he's healthy now. I think in better shape. I think last year when he got sent to Worcester was kind of a wake up call for him about dedicating himself and applying himself to the position. He had a much better final couple of months. And after a very disappointing start to his first year with the Red Sox, I think the arrow was starting to point up at the end of the year. So we'll see what the rest of the winter brings.
Alex is curious what the plan at the backup catching position is if the Red Sox want to run with Narvaez or if there is any plan to potentially add some depth.
Yeah, I think that's an open question, but given that they made a trade for Narvaez and put him on the 40-man roster, I would say he's probably the guy who is the front runner to be the backup catcher. There are some guys out there. Of course, that has changed a lot in the last week too, because the expectation was that Kyle Teal was going to be available maybe as early as May or June to come up and start getting a share of the catcher's time. Now that he's been sent to the White Sox in the trade for Garrett Crochet, that timeline has changed. And whereas they were looking for an experienced backup that could maybe help out Connor Wong for the first couple of months, now the potential is there for a somewhat bigger role. But I would say, as things stand, that Narvaez is certainly at the top of the depth chart to be the backup catcher behind Connor Wong. They still could bring in competition. They could sign another veteran catch and throw guy, but that's where they stand now.
And turning to pitching, Barbara is curious if the Red Sox are projecting Aroldis Chapman to be the closer in 2025, or if they kind of see Liam Hendriks in that role, because she says there hasn't been much mention of Hendriks' status this offseason.
Right. Well, there are some question marks about Hendriks, as we know, coming off Tommy John surgery. His hope and expectation was that he was going to come back in time in September and make his debut for the Red Sox over the final couple of weeks. He ran into some physical obstacles in the closing weeks and wasn't able to do that. That's a reminder, as if we needed one, that Tommy John surgery, you're not guaranteed to bounce back without incident from that. It's a major surgery. And while so many guys have had it and come back successfully, sometimes there are some obstacles and delays in the recovery process. And that's what Liam Hendriks ran into last year. The Red Sox have avoided getting into specifics about how they see Chapman, which indicates that there could be some uncertainty and some competition in spring training. I would say going in that if he's healthy and physically cleared, that there is a better chance, a far better chance, in my opinion, that Hendriks opens the year as the closer and Chapman is one of the primary setup guys in the seventh or eighth inning. But obviously, Chapman, I think, is fourth among active pitchers in saves in baseball. He's done it before. He just hasn't done it a lot over the last 3 or 4 years as he gets older. He's now 37. He did close for the Pirates over the last 6 weeks or so when their closer, David Bednar, struggled to hold down that job, so he can still do it. My sense, though, is that they like Chapman more in the eighth inning and that the tentative plan is to have Hendriks close. And I might even put a guy like Justin Slayton in front of Chapman as the second most likely closer candidate. Uh, Slayton was very impressive as a rookie last year, taken in the Rule 5 draft. However, he's 25 years old. He's only got a year of major league service time. It may be asking a lot for him to step into that closer's role. So a lot of this gets played out in spring training, and a lot has to do with physical readiness and where Hendriks sits. But I would say it's unlikely that Chapman begins the year as the closer.
Richard wants to know, is there a player on the Red Sox who's most likely to be traded before the offseason is over?
Well, based on what we've heard, you would have to consider both Tristan Casas and Wilyer Abreu as the two guys most likely to go in a trade, whether that's to get additional pitching or perhaps to find a right-handed bat. We've heard Abreu's name come up since the end of the season. He's a guy that a lot of teams have interest in, and why wouldn't they? First year in the big leagues, he wins a Gold Glove playing right field in Fenway. No easy task. To date, he has struggled against lefties, and he'll have to get better at that. But there's a lot to like about a young player, and that's the case for Casas too, who has the potential to be a 35 or 40 home run guy. We've already heard that his name has come up in trade talks with the Seattle Mariners, who are definitely looking for a little thump in their lineup. They could use somebody at first base. So I would say of the guys off the major league roster, now that they've dipped in and traded one of the big four prospects, that Abreu and Casas are the names that get mentioned most in trade proposals.
And Peter wants to know how serious the Red Sox are about moving Devers off of third base, whether that's putting him in the DH role or at first base.
It seems as if they are somewhat reluctant to do that, and I guess you can understand it a little bit. Devers obviously wants to stay at third. It's the only position he's played as a professional, other than a handful of games here and there, or moving over to second base late in games after some defensive substitutions. But he has been a third baseman and wants to remain there. The question is, can they continue to live with his defense there? I find it a little odd that were they to sign Bregman, that they would put him at second base and keep Devers at third, because Bregman just won a Gold Glove at third and has been a far better defender than Devers has been at the position. If they were to trade for Nolan Arenado, I think that might be different. Arenado has told people that he would be willing to move to first, but I think coming to Boston, it would make sense for Arenado to take over at third and Devers to either go to first or DH. There's a lot of connected pieces here. Can they find someone to take Masataka Yoshida off their hands? Can they unload the salary from him and get out from underneath that? So, there's kind of a domino-like effect. It depends on who comes in, what that particular skill set is. But a guy like Arenado with 10 gold gloves and a reputation for being really one of the best fielding third basemen in modern history, I find it hard to believe that they would entertain moving him off third and keeping Devers there. A lot still in play there, depending on which way they go to go get a righty bat.
So Eric wants to know if the Red Sox are more likely to pursue another high-end pitcher via trade or free agency. And then tying this in with Luke's question, he mentions Jordan Montgomery and if why there aren't any trade rumors coming from Arizona, and if there are, should the Red Sox be involved in those?
Yeah, it's a good question as to whether they're likely to get another pitcher via trade or free agency. You could make the case for either. You could say that, well, they've already traded three top 10 prospects to get Garrett Crochet, and they probably don't want to thin out their prospect base. Additionally, with another trade, they could, as we've already mentioned, include a young major leaguer like Abreu or Casas. The other point of view is that we know that John Henry is not fond of really long free agent contracts for pitchers in their 30s. That would certainly apply to somebody like Corbin Burns, who is probably likely to get a deal bigger than the one signed by Max Fried. That means 8 years and probably 225, 230, 240 million. I have a hard time thinking that Henry's going to greenlight that, but I could see the Red Sox aiming a bit lower in free agency and going after someone who would require a smaller and shorter term deal, somebody like Jack Flaherty, somebody like Walker Buehler, who wouldn't command the kind of money that Burns is going to get on the open market. Again, I hate to be evasive, but there's a couple of ways they could go here, and there are positives and negatives attached to both. Um, Gun to my head, I think they end up getting one of those next level down free agents, somebody like Flaherty or Bueller, who would not require the same sort of financial commitment that a guy like Burns would.
Teoscar Hernandez is a big name coming up a lot this offseason, especially being tied to the Red Sox. So Matt wants to know if the Red Sox don't end up signing Teoscar Hernandez, if Jurickson Profar is an alternative to that.
Well, he could certainly help out, and he's a versatile guy who's played both the infield and outfield. I think here it's likely he would fit into left field at Fenway. And Profar had an incredible year. It's not often that you see a guy 7 or 8 years into his big league career have his best season, but that's what happened with Profar and the Padres last year. But let's not confuse the kind of production you're going to get from Profar with what you could expect from Teoscar Hernandez. One way or another, the Red Sox do need a righty bat, preferably somebody who could fit into left field. And in that sense, Profar would make some sense. But there's a big drop off between Hernandez, who could expect to get you 30 and 100, and Profar, who, though he had a great year last year, doesn't possess that same kind of power. But it might be an alternative if they miss out on Hernandez, who is being pursued not only by the Dodgers, who'd like to keep him after signing him to a 1 year pillow deal last year, but also the Yankees, who have to find a bat to try to replace Juan Soto in left field. So the Red Sox are in for a real bidding war if they're going to go to the mat on somebody like Teoscar Hernandez.
So Sean, he prefaces his question by saying this is a crazy idea, but if there's any reason the Sox don't approach the Oakland A's to take on Yoshida's contract, and he points to that Oakland might have problems getting free agents to take their money, and they need to kind of take on contracts to get to that limit.
Yeah, a good question because that's exactly why Luis Severino signed with the A's and why the A's have been out looking to spend money because they've essentially been put on notice by Major League Baseball that because of their status as a revenue sharing club, they have to get to a floor of about 75 or 80 million to ward off any grievances on the part of the Players Association. The Players Association has the right to appeal to Major League Baseball if they believe that a revenue sharing beneficiary, as the A's certainly are not spending commensurate with that kind of money. That's why they suddenly are being aggressive. So Yoshida could be somebody that would make some sense. I have to think that the Red Sox would need to take back some of that money, but it's probably doable, and it's an interesting proposal that Oakland might have some interest. I haven't heard anything specifically, but being that they need to add to their payroll, even if they don't take all of Yoshida's money over the final 3 years, the Red Sox, I think, would be willing to take some back to facilitate a trade.
Scott is wondering with this offseason if free agents just don't want to sign with the Red Sox because they don't think they'll be particularly good in 2025, or is it a money issue, or is there an underlying issue there?
I don't sense any hesitation on the part of free agents being willing to sign here. I think most people across the industry, players included, and free agents, uh, recognize that the arrow is starting to point up on the Red Sox. It doesn't mean that they're going to win the division or even compete for it, but at least they got back to 500 last year and seem to be improving, particularly when you look at the talent base they have of young players, guys who are just emerging, players like Duran, Rafaela, Abreu, Casas, all under 27 or 28 years old, just coming into their prime. And then you add the remaining big three prospects, which promises to improve the team, and a willingness on the part of the Red Sox to spend the money. That was something we didn't see last year. They were not aggressive at all. They signed a total of two major league free agent contracts before the start of spring training, and it was pretty obvious that they weren't committing to contending in 2024. I think their pursuit of Juan Soto, the willingness to go as far as 700 million, their willingness to go to 180, 190 million on Max Fried is sending a different signal to the industry that this offseason the Red Sox are more serious. I think Boston's always a pretty attractive place to play. It has been less so over the last 5 years as the Red Sox have scaled back spending and had the predictable results on the field as a result of that. But it seems like things are turning around at least a little bit, and I think most of the industry understands that.
And this person said that there was no need to identify him, but sticking with the high-priced free agents, if you think John Henry's kind of out of his comfort zone when it comes to those kinds of free agents like Soto, Fried, Snell, and Adames.
Um, I think you have to evaluate that on a case by case basis. Obviously, they went to $700 million on Soto. I know that there are cynics out there who said that the Red Sox only were in it for PR purposes. They knew that Steve Cohen and the Mets were going to outbid everybody, so it didn't hurt to have their name linked to Soto and an apparent willingness to spend. I thought it was a genuine pursuit and interest on the part of the Red Sox. But I think there's always some case by case here. And one of the things that strikes me is that the Red Sox had been willing to compete for free agents who are younger. Soto was 26. You were going to get 8 or 9 years of his prime. That is less. Uh, uh, that's less of an issue for John Henry. We already talked about the fact that he doesn't like getting into bidding wars for pitchers into their 30s because of the injury risk. And I think that still applies, even though they are willing to make an exception for Fried and at least have checked in on Burns. We'll see how successful that pursuit is. They stayed away from Adames, frankly, because I don't think that was a great fit. They're fine at shortstop with Trevor Story. Adames had never played third. He doesn't seem to be the kind of guy that you would bump Devers from his position. Last year, they were in on Yamamoto again because of age. It's easier for John Henry to green light that commitment when you're not talking about a guy in his 30s. It's going to carry with him a lot of risk over the length of that deal. So I think it's a case by case basis. But in general, it's obvious the Red Sox have been more aggressive this winter than last.
Darrell is putting you in the GM seat, and with the need for a right-handed bat, if you could choose between Arenado, Bregman, Hernandez, or Santander, who would you choose to fill that void?
I would go with Hernandez. I think he fits exactly what they're looking for as a guy that could hit fourth or fifth in the lineup, be a right-handed pull hitter. He's always hit well at Fenway. He's not a great outfielder, but they could hide him in left field for half the games. They may have to be a little creative when they were on the road and they're in bigger ballparks with more ground to cover. But Hernandez is a tremendous run production bat. Bregman scares me because of the decline over the last couple of years. I would say the same for Arenado and Santander. Had a great year last year, 44 homers, but he's a switch hitter, so you'd be adding at least part of the time another left-handed bat, and he's not a very good outfielder. So of those four, I like Hernandez the most by some margin.
And Zachary is curious, when do you think Corbin Burns will sign?
Could be today, could be a week, could be next month. We've seen that it's a hard thing to try to predict timelines for free agents. Certainly, the fact that Max Fried is off the board clarifies his situation, narrows down the number of teams involved. The Yankees won the bidding for Fried, so they're probably out. But all the teams that had some interest in Fried, like the Red Sox, may turn their attention to Burns. And that's one more opportunity for teams to go out and get a proven all-star caliber starter for their rotation. Um, in the past, Scott Boris's clients have gone late in the offseason, but they went so late last year when you look at guys like Montgomery and Snell and Bellinger that they ended up having to take short-term deals because spring training was underway and time was running out. So I think Boris has tried to be a little more aggressive and force the issue, but now he sits with the best free agent starter and can probably let the bidding go up at least a little bit. I'd be surprised if Burns did not sign before Christmas, but that's just kind of a guess.
And to wrap things up here, Nathan wants to know, in your opinion, when it comes to the off season, is the off season better when there's moves happening over an extended period of time or when they kind of come at like a mass? He called it bonanza.
Yeah, I think that baseball has some catching up to do when it comes to free agency. We know that in the NFL and the NBA and the NHL, the first couple of days of free agency um, it is exactly that bananas, everybody off the board in 48 hours. That shortens up the free agency window, but I think baseball's at the other extreme where particularly like last year where you had big names unsigned into late February and early March. I think at some point fans tune out. They don't want to wait 4 months to see where some of the best players are going to end up. So if I think if most fans had their choice or had their druthers, I think they'd prefer to see them all come off the board pretty quickly rather than drag this out.
This one from Shane, he's asking if Campbell will have a true shot at second base or if Grissom will beat him out.
Talk about Campbell too much, but he could definitely be in the mix. I think he could also be in the mix in left field if they don't end up getting somebody like Hernandez or anyone else to play the outfield. I think they would prefer to find an experienced right-handed power bat, but if they don't, left field is one more place that Campbell could fit in. But if they don't get Bregman or another full timer at second, he could also compete with Grissom and others for an infield spot, or he's a guy that could move around a little bit as Rafaela has. All
Perfect.
right. We thank everyone for submitting questions for us. There are certainly a lot of them. We tried to get through just about all of them. Thanks again. We'll do another mailbag episode sometime in January at the start of the year. There will undoubtedly be some news by then to react to. And the best place where you can keep current on all Red Sox development is, of course, the Red Sox Insider Text Program, which is very simple to sign up for. All you have to do is text the word join to 617-751-6257, then click on the link to subscribe. That will give you a free 14-day trial period, after which you'll be charged $4.99 per month. A reminder that we have another episode coming up later in the week with what we hope is a Red Sox guest. Still working on that. I want to give my thanks to Lauren Campbell for ably co-hosting and reading all the questions today. Lauren, thanks for your help.
Thank you again for having me.
And we'll see you with another episode coming up later this week.